Super excited to talk with you here tonight on social emotional learning. So SEL, this goes by many aliases. There's character education, grit, mindset, soft skills. Essentially, we're talking about the stuff that's super important for students to learn, but is all too often absent in our school curricula. I'd like to begin by, over the course of the talk, I'd like to sort of illustrate sort of how and why it matters, and then particularly to spend some time proposing where I see this sort of movement in education headed. So to do this, I'm going to drag us all back to my teaching days when I was a high school social studies teacher, and specifically to a moment where my otherwise excellent teacher training program left me completely unprepared to handle the following situation. So there was poor Molly sitting there, staring deeply into the wall of my 10th grade classroom, looking pretty much stunned, as though I just handed her an F when she was expecting to see an A+ on a test. But in actuality, she had not even begun the assignment. So the essay that she had was due 2 weeks from now, and so I gave it one last try to help her pick a topic. Molly, I don't mean to pressure you. The essay's not due right now, you got 2 weeks, but I do have to leave at 4, so if I'm gonna help you sort of figure out what you wanna write this thing about, maybe you can get started, maybe you can tell me a little bit about what you're interested in that we've talked about this semester. Nothing. I don't know. Maybe, Mr. G, can't you just give me a topic? No, Molly, I really want you invested in this. Like, this should be something you care about, you're interested in. It should come from you and one of the things you're curious about. So just by way of background here, as a teacher, I was never a huge fan of the basics, right? So the standardized tests, the facts and dates in history class, the 3 R's, and then those sorts of things. But writing mattered. This was a skill I knew most of my students were going to use across the full spectrum of their lives, both professionally and personally, and I figured I could help my 10th graders improve in this domain. I think I figured wrong with Molly. So at this particular moment, this was the second time I had assigned an essay and been rewarded for doing so with this sort of decision-making paralysis from Molly. In my efforts to help her develop this basic skill of writing, I think what I ultimately came to the conclusion that what I had done was I had just completely missed something even more fundamental than writing, and that was motivation. So 4 p.m. came and went. Molly spent a full hour in my classroom that afternoon, rendered completely inert by this lack of motivation. Fast forward a few years, and at the beginning of my doctoral studies, I began to see with much greater clarity the role of how motivation impacted the students several years previous in my classroom. And so, for example, a favorite theory of mine focused on the notion that all students are intrinsically motivated to pursue things that will help them establish autonomy, right? So in the sort of classroom sense, endowing them with choices, letting them kind of choose their own path through content or activities that they wanted was a particularly good way of promoting student autonomy. So ultimately then, I came to appreciate that as important as writing or any other topic you might teach in school was for students' futures, I really couldn't make any headway until I cultivated an appropriately motivating classroom climate. So as we think about the hierarchy of student needs, motivation really trumped, superseded any learning agenda that I might want to pursue. With another couple years of graduate study, I also figured out that motivation was not the only thing that sort of functioned as this prerequisite for student learning. So if you imagine the finest curriculum the world could ever put forth, and walk that into a classroom where the students just hate the teacher, or they can't focus on this curriculum long enough to digest any of it, you soon begin to appreciate that social connections and self-regulation matter every bit as much as motivation. So, this idea that some sort of student needs were really primary and learning couldn't happen until these needs were met, while other needs are much more subsidiary, strikes me as an insight that is immensely important and equally obvious. It's also a particularly timely idea right now for education, I think. And so, in the same way that's happened for decades, as today's educators desperately try and figure out how the heck do I pack in 365 days of content into just the 180 school days that I've been allocated, they're getting a new pressure. So school leaders now have to think about social-emotional learning and character education programs, insisting that they also have to get students cultivating aspirations and belonging and curiosity and decency and engagement and flexible thinking, grit, happiness, and so on through the whole entire alphabet that SEL has become. So what do educators prioritize? What do they attend to first? Well, we already ask a ton of our teachers, and we need to think realistically about what domains are nice to know and have them focus on, and what they really truly need to learn very deeply. And so when distilled down to the foundations of what students really need to know before any kind of learning might transpire, I think one finds social connectedness, motivation, and self-regulation. Now, I'm a little chagrined to report that I am probably the poster child of why this deep knowledge of a few select concepts is so important. As I map my early graduate learning back onto Molly's afternoon of agony in my classroom, what was kind of weird was that my intuitions were not too bad. As far as choice was concerned anyway, I had given her tons of choice. She could choose from any topic we'd covered in class. But my deeper understanding of motivation and what I did wrong with Molly, I figured out more in my fourth year of graduate school when I kind of refined the aforementioned theory. So my moment of enlightenment occurred while I was reading about, and you've probably already guessed this, orange marmalade, raspberry preserves, and fig jam. So a few years prior to my arrival at graduate school, a psych professor who studied motivation, he and his students went and set up little displays of jam in a grocery store. Sometimes they offered shoppers 6 samples of jam, sometimes 30. They then ran essentially the same sort of choice paradigm with undergraduates offering 6 or I think 24 essay choices. What they found was that choice was indeed highly motivating, but it had to be limited choice that was meaningful to either the shoppers or the students. So despite, or perhaps because of my blunder, I remain intensely optimistic about the future and the potential of social-emotional learning. I think we've hit upon one of the most promising approaches to improving student outcomes that anyone's come up with in years. But educators face far too many competing ideas to master all of them. So that it can live up to its vast potential, I hope we can limit the choices, so to speak, within the SEL canon, and focus on helping educators understand the most foundational of student needs, connecting with others, feeling motivated, and endowing them with the capacity to self-regulate. Thank you.